Mr. Subrata, you spoke about subsidies. I'll take that point across to Mr. Sorabjee as well. Mr. Sorabjee, again, a lot of people talk about the numbers that EV manufacturers are posting, the sales figures and everything. A lot of that has to be attributed to the subsidies as well, the 5% GST or the FAME subsidies. But also, you see this trend as far as the government is concerned. A lot of that is slowly being pulled back. Do you think the sales and the numbers and the fact that EVs are a lucrative option right now for the buyers, will it be the same after all the subsidies are pulled back?
Well, I don't think all the subsidies are going to be pulled back in a hurry. I mean, yes, we have FAME. We have to see what FAME 3 is. We still have a 5% GST on EVs, which is really quite low. That's a pretty good subsidy. But, honestly, I think the EV problem is not so much whether the subsidy or the subsidy is being pulled back or the range. It's a very fundamental issue, and that is the access to home charging. I mean, that is turning out to be the biggest bottleneck. While we might just be doing 30, 40 kilometers a day, you still don't want to go to a public charger because it's inconvenient. A lot of them don't work. In fact, Tata Motors has a very good statistic that over 90% of, let's say, Nexon buyers all have home charging. So what does this tell you? So many didn't buy an EV because they don't have home charging. So I think home charging is turning out to be the biggest bottleneck right now. And, until that is accelerated, of course, there are challenges. Everyone doesn't have a dedicated slot, leave alone a slot where they can attach a charger. So this is definitely one issue. Then I think, we've also moved from the stage of the early adopters to the early majority. Now, the early adopters, they just went in, they were EV evangelists. They were willing to take the pain and uncertainty of what an EV brought with it. But I think the early majority are taking a more pragmatic view, maybe even a more skeptical view. And there are two questions which are still unanswered right now, purely because EVs haven't been there long enough. One is, what is the resale value going to be? And that, I think, is a bomb waiting to drop because resale values anecdotally are looking quite bad. And second, what is the battery life? Now, there's a lot of confusion over there because these cars come with 8-year warranties for their batteries, but it doesn't mean the life is 8 years. That's the warranty of the battery. The battery can go longer, but we don't know how long the battery is because cars haven't been around for 8 to 10 years. So a lot of unanswered questions. But I am bullish long term. I think there is a bit of skepticism right now. But I think, as a city solution, nothing beats an EV. I mean, I drive an EV every day. We have a couple of EVs in our fleet. And at least for town, I'm not talking about out of town, as an urban solution, it is absolutely fantastic. The way it drives, it's a superb automatic. It's smooth. It has a lot of pluses that come with it. But I think there are a lot of questions which are unanswered. And that is what is causing a little bit of, let's say, skepticism amongst the consumers.
Absolutely. Dr. Mehta, a very interesting point there raised as well about how a lot of people prefer home charging instead of actually charging outside because of various constraints as far as technology is also concerned. And before I come to that, one other point that Mr. Sorabjee also raised here, which I really want to talk about, is the resale value. I mean, we all talk about the resale value as far as your regular cars are concerned, but nobody really talks about it in terms of EVs. Do you think it's also a major concern because that's an area that nobody seems to have explored so far? I mean, with EVs, you usually have a technology-oriented vehicle, and after a point, after, say, for example, 4 or 5 years, that technology becomes obsolete. So the resale value would pretty much be nil. I mean, nobody would want to buy a vehicle which has a technology which is 5-year-old.
So, Ashish, let me answer both points. The first point is on resale value. Fundamentally, an EV has lesser number of moving parts than a conventional vehicle. So actually, the maintenance required on an EV is much less. Also, the life of an EV is going to be far greater. The third thing which is going to happen is the battery prices are expected to go down. So as the universe of EVs goes up, the battery prices will come down. So which is the primary cost? And battery has to be actually equated to fuel. Now, the other game changer which is going to happen in India over the next 10 years is the fact that solar is coming in a very big way. Now, think of a scenario 10 years from now, and this is not too much far into the future. The government is now talking about 100 million households which have solar at the home level. Now, you're talking almost kind of the holy grail because you have solar for free or near close to zero cost. And then you have EVs, whether they're used for personal or three-wheelers or two-wheelers, or for commercial transport. So you're talking about a complete change in the way our ecosystem will work. And secondly, related to this also is, I think we need to segregate the discussion in personal vehicles and vehicles which are used for profit. Fundamentally, EVs today are profitable if you use them more. If the car is going to be in the garage 95% of the time, then probably the cost factor equation doesn't work in EV's favor. But if you take a bus, you take an electric three-wheeler, you take a two-wheeler which is used for, let's say, last mile deliveries, the equation is extremely, extremely good. So this is where the market will determine where the shift happens. And you can see this by the numbers. Last month, more than 50% of three-wheelers sold in India were electric, where they were nowhere in sight 3 years ago. So this kind of change is happening. The same will happen in buses. And actually, the biggest contributor, or rather the biggest differences that can happen, is the advent of buses. India needs 8 lakh buses, which is what the government is talking about. Imagine if we are able to do that. Our penetration is low.
Correct.
Now, all of us suffer in cities. We are spending gridlock time. It's time that we focus on buses. It's time that we get hundreds and thousands of electric buses. This is not an expensive option, and the unit economics are cheap. It's less than 2 rupees a kilometer per passenger. You can't get a cheaper mode of transport. And if this
Correct.
happens in a big way, I think we can cut
Correct.
the gridlock. This is not spoken of enough, but I think public transport deserves a much bigger chance having electric vehicles.